Okay, Maji, it's go ahead.
Jai Gurudev, Swagatam. Welcome to all for our weekly Maharishi Gita Satsang. We will begin with Sahana Bhavatu by our Maharishi Vedic Pandits. Manishji and Mukeshji, please go ahead.
Om Shahena Bhavatu Shaheno Bhunaktu Shaheviryam Karvavahe Tejashvinamadhetamastu ma vidvishamahe. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Jai Gurudev.
जय गुरुदेव. अभी आप द्वितीय अध्याय का 58 और 59 का ये दो श्लोक पारायण करें कृपया.
जी दीदी. ओम श्री परमात्मने नमः. अथ द्वितीयोऽध्यायः. ओम यदा संहरते चायं कूर्मोऽङ्गानीव सर्वशः इन्द्रियाणेन्द्रियार्थेभ्यः तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता विषया विनिवर्तन्ते निराहारस्य देहिनः रसवर्जं रसोऽप्यस्य परं दृष्ट्वा निवर्तते.
Jai Gurudev. Now I will recap what we have studied in the last session, and this will be recap of shlokas 56, 57, 58 and 59. So in the last session, we have continued our understanding of what Sthita Prajna is. Sthita Prajna, as we discussed, means Jivan Mukta, or one who is in cosmic consciousness. We learned that the mind of Sthita Prajna is the one that had gained bliss consciousness of Atma. Such a man is content and balanced. Just as a crorepati or a millionaire remains unaffected by the rise and fall of the stock market because he has so much money. So losing $1 million here, there, is losing $1 lakh of rupees here and there, it doesn't bother him. So he stays balanced. Also, he stays balanced because he's content with whatever he has. And he doesn't get excited by the toys like a child. A child gets very overjoyed with toys, but Sthita Prajna is an adult and he stays calm and quiet, not like children getting excited. So this state of staying balanced doesn't mean that one is like a robot and does not have any feelings or emotions of love. Like you don't express joy when you find something that you like. It's not like that. As a matter of fact, their hearts are full of love, much more than the other people around them. Only they are unshaken by pleasure and pain, fear and anger. And all this comes naturally. We don't have to try to do anything. We don't have to try to be balanced. Because if you're not a crorepati, if you're not a millionaire, and if you lose some money here and there, and if you think that, oh, Gita says that I should be balanced, so I won't worry about it, this kind of mood making doesn't work. It may last for a few seconds or a few minutes, but then the depression comes that you lost money. And such kind of mood making, it may only increase your stress. And Another point about Sthita Prajna we studied is that there is no sorrow in these Sthita Prajnas. Why does sorrow come? It comes because of lack of fulfillment, lack of love, lack of happiness. But with the transcendental meditation, we know that we have bliss and that fills our heart with contentment. So that's another reason they stay very balanced in any situation. And in such situation, there is no room for any negative emotion such as sorrow, depression, fear, anger, etc. We have also seen that the senses of Sthita Prajna are compared to indrawn limbs of a tortoise. From the outside, it seems like there are no limbs at all when the tortoise pulls the limbs inside. So what does that mean in case of Sthita Prajna? It means that the senses are turned inwards and not outwards. When we transcend, we have silence and the senses are withdrawn. And there is no activity of senses in transcendence. Means we are not seeing anything, not tasting anything, not touching anything. And we have that experience when the mind settles down and the senses are quiet and the senses are not acting. So this is the state of a Sthita Prajna or us when we are doing meditation. And when we come out of meditation, the senses are involved with our outer experience again. But now what happens? They're not fully engrossed. So that these experiences of sense objects, they do not cause any impressions on our mind. So they do not become the seeds for future desires. And finally, we also learned that while we are still on the path that is in sadhana, you may not be involved so much in sense enjoyments. That attraction decreases. For example, if someone was watching every single cricket game, now he may not be watching so much. And he's okay with it. He's not unhappy that he's not watching, every single cricket game. And so gradually, this excessive involvement with the sense enjoyments decreases gradually, and you are getting more and more happiness and contentment from your meditation. And this, even though the sense objects and sense enjoyments decreases, the taste for them inside of us may persist. So what does that mean? Taste persist means you're not watching every single cricket game, but you're thinking about it. So that thought about the cricket game and, what's going on, it may come, but you're physically not watching so much. So the taste will still be there in the mind until we get fully enlightened. So what happens in Sthita Prajna, who is fully established in Atma, even that taste for the sense enjoyments, it goes because now he has Atmananda. Ananda, the bliss from the inner self. And his heart is so full that he does not miss all these outside sense enjoyments and thinking about them. You're not going to the movie, but thinking about the movies, things like that will not be there. And he's fully content and fully happy. But one point is important to remember, and that is the desires are not there in transcendence. When we do meditation, when we transcend, that is a state of desirelessness. Because what is a desire? Desire is a thought. And when we transcend, we go beyond the thought. So there is no thought, no mantra. So there are no desires. So you have reached a state of desirelessness. But when we come out into activity, then there are thoughts and there are desires, which is completely okay. And these desires are there and they will be there even for enlightened people, but they are not making impressions on them. Because it is impossible to live without any desires. Even Maharishi had a desire for world peace. So like that, they are dharmic and they don't make impressions. So that is an important point to remember. And we should not think that when somebody is enlightened, they will not have any desires. Actually, when we get to chapter 7, it says that any desire that is in line with your dharma is okay. And it's completely all right to have dharmic desires. So we'll talk more about it later as and when this topic of desire comes. And this topic of desire comes again and again in Gita. And so it's important to understand the role played by the desires in our path in evolution. So for the benefit of our Hindi-speaking audience, I will say this briefly in Hindi. पिछले सत्संग में हम स्थित प्रज्ञ पुरुष के बारे में चर्चा किए थे। स्थित प्रज्ञ संतुलित होते हैं, ध्यान में भावातीत होकर आनंद अनुभव करने के पश्चात मन तृप्त हो जाता है और तृप्त अवस्था में बाहर निकलता है। तब वो सुख और दुख से प्रभावित नहीं होता। जैसे एक करोड़पति आदमी शेयर मार्केट में उतार चढ़ाव आने पर भी उससे अप्रभावित रहता है। ये प्राकृतिक समभाव ही स्थित प्रज्ञा की स्थिति है और इसका हृदय परिपूर्ण है, इसलिए वह उत्तेजित नहीं होता और संतुलित रहता। ठीक उसी तरह जैसे एक वयस्क खिलौनों को देखकर उत्तेजित नहीं होता है और शिशु खिलौनों के देखकर बहुत खुश हो जाता है। तो हम भावातीत ध्यान करने से संतुलित हो जाते हैं। तो now we will move on to the study of verses 60 to 64. Manish ji and Mukesh ji. वर्स 60 का
जी
हाँ
जी बोलेंगे।
हाँ
जी ओम यततो ह्यपि कौन्तेय पुरुषस्य विपश्चितः इंद्रियाणि प्रमाथीनि हरन्ति प्रसभं मनः तानि सर्वाणि संयम्य युक्त आसीत् मत्परः वशे हि यस्य इन्द्रियाणि तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता। ओम
Jai Gurudev. The turbulent senses, O son of Kunti, forcibly carrying away the mind even of a discerning man who endeavors to control them. Here, Sri Krishna Bhagavan describes to Arjuna the nature of the senses, being the instruments which enable the mind to enjoy the glory of the diversity of creation. They are in duty bound to draw it towards objects of pleasure. Their main purpose is to bring the greatest possible happiness to the mind, and this they will continue to do so long as the mind has not become eternally contented in the bliss of the Absolute. How to make best use of the senses in order to come to the experience of eternal bliss is described in the following verses. Jai Gurudev.
Okay.
And in the scientific research of this verse, and now we see how the turbulent senses, they forcibly carry away the mind, even if a man is very discerning. Now, how do they do that is because you need to have a proper control over mind, because senses become more powerful when you are not in the steady intellect. Now, how do we get over this is that through Maharishi Transcendental Meditation, we have seen and we have noticed a significant increase in our cognitive flexibility. We have also seen that in meditation, by TM, we have the ability to process the complex information properly. Our comprehension increases. We develop greater ability to understand, independently work, to indicate a broader comprehension, and also we increase in our ability to focus attention on everything that we do. So here again, once again, the importance of transcendental meditation, because we have to calm down the turbulent senses. Thank you, Jai Gurudev.
Okay. So in this verse, the nature of senses is described. What do the senses do? Their job is to bring enjoyment from outside pleasures to the mind. So senses are duty bound, means their job is to bring happiness to the mind. Mind is their boss. So a servant tries to make the boss happy. So the senses, like eyes and ears and tongue and all that, they drag the mind and take towards the sense object so that the mind will enjoy seeing, hearing, touching, eating, etc. And so senses are doing their duty. And sometimes they forcibly carry away the mind in the outward direction. And so then, because it's not balanced by inward direction, the mind is always engaged in sense enjoyments. And this will continue as long as the mind is not anchored to inner silence. Because when the mind is anchored to inner silence, when mind is established in Atma or experience of Atma, then you have inner happiness and you become content. But since the mind is since the mind is going in outward direction and not going inward, the mind is not experiencing the inner happiness. So the shloka is saying that this excessive enjoyment of the sense objects will continue for as long as the mind is not experiencing the inner happiness of the self. So इस श्लोक में इंद्रियों की प्रकृति का वर्णन किया गया है. और इंद्रियों की प्रकृति क्या है? बाहरी सुखों से मन को आनंद ले आना. अपने मन जो उनकी यजमानी है, वो यजमानी को वो संतुष्ट रखना चाहते हैं, तो इसीलिए ये इंद्रियां मन को बाहरी ओर ले जाते हैं. वे बलपूर्वक मन को बहिर्मुख ले जाते हैं, क्योंकि अपने यजमानी को संतुष्ट करना है. और ये कब तक चलेगा? तब तक कि मन आंतरिक शांति से बंधा हुआ नहीं है और हमेशा के लिए आनंदित चेतना में संतुष्ट नहीं है. जब ये आनंदित चेतना, वो आत्म चेतना में संतुष्ट होता है, तब मन अंतर्मुख होते हैं और आत्मानंद का अनुभव करते हैं. So, any questions on this? You may ask in English or Hindi. So one point that should be very clear is that it is not that sense enjoyments are bad. Sense enjoyments are quote unquote bad only when gets excessively involved in sense enjoyments to the point where they don't have time to meditate, they don't have time to go inward and experience the bliss of transcending. Because this joy of transcending is much, much more than the joy one gets in the sense enjoyments. So that is the point that is made here. And it is indicated here, the role played by the senses and how to get them organized, how to get the senses to be under our control instead of us being in their control. Okay, so if there are no questions, we will move on. Manish ji. 61. 61. Only एक 61 ही करना.
जी दीदी. ओम तानि सर्वाणि संयम्य युक्त आसीत मत्परः वशे हि यस्येन्द्रियाणि तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता. Om.
Having brought them all under control, let him sit united, looking to me as supreme, for his intellect is established, whose senses are subdued. The previous verse explained the nature of the senses and their overpowering influence on the mind, while the verses that follow depict the dangers which result from their indulgence when the level of the transcendent is not maintained. In this world, Sri Krishna Bhagavan holds out hope by showing that it is possible to control the senses and that his intellect is established, whose senses are subdued. Sri Krishna Bhagavan says, having brought them all under control, let him sit united, looking to me as supreme. This opens up a way for when the attention has been brought to the transcendent, the activity of the senses ceases and they will be automatically controlled. In this state of life, says Krishna Bhagavan, let him sit united, looking to me as supreme. The technique of bringing them all under control is to engage any one sense in providing increasing happiness for the mind on the path of transcending. That is, to begin the practice of transcendental meditation. In this process, the mind, using a particular sense for passing through the inner levels of experience and transcending the subtlest experience, also transcends the field of that sense and the fields of all the senses. Gaining bliss consciousness in this way, the mind wins automatic control over all the senses. Let him sit united, looking to me as supreme. The man who sits united is one whose self is united with the self or being, even though he is engaged in action. Through the repeated practice of transcendental meditation, he has realized being to such fullness that no activity can overshadow it. That is to say, he has realized being as separate from activity. Having gained this state, says Krishna Bhagavanji, let him maintain it. In that state, be devoted to me. And Shri Krishna Bhagavan of all the creation, who presides over both the absolute and the relative phases of existence. The teaching is that having gained cosmic consciousness and having thereby created a situation where mind and senses remain naturally organized, using their full potential to fulfill desires that further the good of the world, a man should devote himself to God and let the heart flow and overflow in love for him. The great Sri Krishna Bhagavan to all, he alone can be someone to whom life in cosmic consciousness can turn. For being omnipotent and omniscient, he ranks higher than life in cosmic consciousness. The purpose of this teaching of devotion to God on the high level where man has reached his full potentiality is to enable him to experience the great waves of bliss in the ocean of cosmic consciousness, to experience that joyfulness of eternal life which brings complete fulfillment to his existence. The scientific research of this verse 61 goes, now, for the intellect to be established, whose senses are subdued, what does it mean? That means that you need to increase your ability to attend to details. And how would you increase your ability is through transcendental meditation, as it has been proven. So what happens when we go into deeper silence and we understand that state of transcendence, then what happens? There is more development of ability of comprehension. We are able to face more attention, focus more attention, because our mental clarity and wakefulness have developed to that extent. Then there is improved intellectual performance, and when there is an improved intellectual performance, then the outcome obviously is that we develop more problem solving ability, and because we have greater mental orientation. Again, this verse takes us to the greatest importance of TM in our life in order to reach and understand and control the turbulent senses. Jai Gurudev.
Okay. It seems like there are some technical issues Sachin is dealing with. He's trying to make Sunita co-host again. She lost that connection. But meanwhile, I will comment on this verse. So from the previous verse, it seems like it is hard to control the senses, because we are saying that the senses are forcibly carrying away the mind and taking it outward. So this verse is telling us that it is possible to control the senses, and we can do that easily. And as Anita ji had explained, with with the transcendental meditation, which is proven by scientific research shows that the senses can be controlled. So how this happens is explained here. We take one sense to finer fields of experience. We all know that there are several layers in existence, in creation, grosser levels, finer levels, finest levels, like that. So we take any one sense, and in TM, we take the sense of hearing. So we take a mantra, and then we take that to finer fields of experience. And so we experience finer states of thought, and then the finest level we reach, and then we go beyond that and experience inner bliss. We are in transcendence. And there is more happiness, because in subtler levels and subtler fields, there is more happiness. The mind knows that, so it automatically moves in that direction. And what happens is, when one sense is moving in that direction, all other senses follow. And all this happens automatically. So, the man who is united with the self that is established in the self, in Atma. He is devoted to God even when he is engaged in action. So even when the senses are involved in the sense objects, he is still united with the self and he is devoted to God. This does not mean that he's trying to think of God while doing other things. Like, for example, a housewife, she's not trying to think of God while she's cooking or doing any other housework, like thinking, oh, I should be thinking of God now. It's not like that. This awareness, it is just a beautiful awareness that you are with God and that God is with you. And this feeling comes by itself automatically. And as one continues to grow in love and devotion, one experiences great waves of bliss in the ocean of cosmic consciousness. So, पिछले श्लोक से ऐसा प्रतीत होता है कि इंद्रियों को वश में करना कठिन है, और ये श्लोक में ये बता रहा है कि इंद्रियों को वश में करना संभव है. कैसे? भावती ध्यान से. उससे सभी इंद्रियों को नियंत्रण में लाने की पद्धति है. हम एक भाव को अनुभव के बेहतर क्षेत्रों में ले जाते हैं, फिर बेहतरीन स्तर से आगे जाते हैं. जैसे जैसे हम जागरूकता के परिष्कृत स्तरों की ओर बढ़ते हैं, हम अधिक से अधिक आनंद का अनुभव करते हैं और अन्य सभी इंद्रियां उसका अनुसरण करती हैं और यह अपने आप होता है. स्थितप्रज्ञ पुरुष का आत्मा से युक्त है. वे कर्म करते हुए भी ईश्वर के प्रति समर्पित रहता है. ऐसा नहीं है कि खाना बनाते समय या घर का काम करते समय या अन्य कार्य करते समय ईश्वर के बारे में सोचने की कोशिश करते हैं. यह सिर्फ एक सुंदर जागरूकता की स्थिति है कि आप भगवान के साथ हैं और भगवान आपके साथ हैं. यह एहसास अपने आप आता है और जैसे जैसे व्यक्ति प्रेम और भक्ति में बढ़ता जाता है, वैसे वैसे वह संसार की चेतना के सागर में आनंद की विस्तृत लहरों का अनुभव करता है. So now I want to ask if there are any questions, either in Hindi or English. Please go ahead.
Yes, Hema ji.
Yeah.
What we have earlier also understood in the Gita sessions is when you are in that type of an established behavior or intellect, and you are doing the chores of your house, your cooking, or your washing, then you are solely involved into it. Because at that moment, you're only thinking of making good food for your family. Now, what happens with this type of a feeling and intention of the awareness? Yes, everything good has to go into the food. Then, like Maharishi says, the food will be more tastier, more beneficial, and it will, in the food also, there will be more of positivity and enjoyment to eat because it has been made with that type of love. Am I right?
Yes. So
Yes.
the bliss that we have in meditation, it spills over into activity. जो आनंद हम ध्यान में पाते हैं, वो ध्यान से हम बाहर निकल के बाद भी वो आनंद हमारे साथ बाहर निकलेगा और हम जो कुछ भी काम कर रहे हैं उसमें वो आनंद दिखाया जाता है. That प्रेम और आनंद in every action you do, you have that in the action. And so everything you do becomes blissful. Even chores, when you're doing it, it becomes a blissful, enjoyable activity. So that is the value of bringing the bliss out into the activity. It's called infusion of being, infusion of that divinity, that love and happiness that is inside the Atma. We bring it outside after meditation. So that is the biggest advantage. And so we are happy in meditation. We are happy after we come out of meditation also. That's a good point, Anita ji.
No,
Any
but
other question?
and the
Yeah.
added point is
Yeah.
the added point is then whatever we do, there is less of stress and strain on us
Yes.
because
Yes.
we are doing that with the on the level of pleasure and enjoyment, not forcibly that work is in us. So when we do with this intention, then the stress and over our own self is much less. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So now we move on. We are going into Mataji's time. Manish ji, next shloka, please.
I'll take all the
जी
three.
दीदी
Yeah. So Manish ji, Manish, ऐसा
जी
करना
जी दीदी
60,
जी
62, 63, 64. तीनों का
जी
करना.
जी
Yeah,
दीदी
please continue, because I'll just give the summary, of all
जी.
three.
Yeah.
ॐ ध्यायतो विषयान् पुंसः सङ्गस्ते सुपजायते सङ्गात् सञ्जायते कामः कामात् क्रोधोऽभिजायते क्रोधात् भवति सम्मोहः सम्मोहात् स्मृतिविभ्रमः स्मृतिभ्रंशात् बुद्धिनाशो बुद्धिनाशात् प्रणश्यति रागद्वेषवियुक्तेस्तु विषयानिन्द्रियैश्चरन् आत्मस्यैर्विधेयात्मा प्रसादमधिगच्छति ॐ जय गुरुदेव.
So 62 to 64, I here.
All three he recited. Now we'll do English translation and then Mataji will make comments.
Jai Gurudev.
Okay, Gurudeva.
Pondering on objects of the senses, a man develops attachment for them. From attachment springs up desire, and desire gives rise to anger. This verse depicts one who is not turned towards the divine, but towards the objects of the senses. The Lord shows how much a man gradually sinks deeper and deeper into the mire of delusion until he perishes. Thought is a great force in man. It develops into desire, which in turn translates itself into action. Bringing glory or disgrace, anger arises from weakness or inability to fulfill one's desires, although it is generally attributed to obstacles in the way of such fulfillment. And thus, desire is said to be the direct cause of anger. Shall I read the next one, Hemaji?
Yeah, please read now.
Verse 63. From anger arises delusion. From delusion, unsteadiness of memory. From unsteadiness of memory, destruction of intellect. Through the destruction of the intellect, he perishes. Anger excites the mind, which loses its balance and power of discrimination. It loses proper vision and foresight and a right sense of values. This state of delusion obscures the track of memory, and thereby one feels as if disconnected from the harmonious rhythm of life. Wisdom fails, and the intellect ceases to function. The boat of life is left with nobody in control. It meets with disaster as a matter of course. The intellect is the finest aspect of one's subjective nature. As long as the intellect is intact, there is every hope of the advancement and fulfillment of life. That is why Sri Krishna Bhagavan says that the destruction of the intellect results in a man's ruin. Verse 64. But he who is self-disciplined, who moves among the objects of the senses, with the senses freed from attachment and aversion and under his own control, he attains to grace. Grace here means delight and wholeness, resulting from the state of pure consciousness. This verse contrasts with the two preceding verses. Having explained to Arjuna the plight of those who surrender themselves to the call of desire without possessing control of the senses. Sri Krishna Bhagavan in this verse shows him the reward gained by the man who disciplines himself before plunging into worldly life. Sri Krishna Bhagavan here explains the status of the integrated man. He is established in the self, and by virtue of this, even when he acts in the field of the senses and experiences their objects, he is not lost in them. Maintaining his status in being, he quite naturally maintains evenness of mind. His sense of values is balanced. Acting in the world, he is not lost and detachment, contented in himself, not bound by anything. The results of reaching this state of blissful freedom are described in the verses that follow. Jai Guru.
Jai Gurudev.
Mataji, you want me to do the scientific research, please? Or is it okay?
Yeah. Hema,
Before
what,
or after?
after that?
Let's do it after. Anitaji, let's do it after
Okay,
Mataji's
fine,
comments.
fine,
Okay.
fine.
Okay. So there are these three verses here, very important verses. I will quickly, read it again. Pondering on objects of the senses, a man develops attachment for them. From attachment springs up desire, and desire gives rise to anger. From anger, delusion arises. From delusion, unsteadiness of memory. From unsteadiness of memory, the destruction of the intellect. Through the destruction of the intellect, he perishes. But he who is self-disciplined, who moves among the objects of the senses, with the senses freed from attachment and aversion, and under his own control, he attains grace. I will also just say the 65th verse, because it ends with the grace. In grace is born an end to all his sorrows. Indeed, the intellect of the man of exalted consciousness soon becomes firmly established. I just wanted to I'm not going to cover 65, but I thought, it is just important, just where grace has entered. Now, what I will try to do is try to bring these various factors together. Here we have the senses and the mind. There is the desire with attachment and aversion, the ragadveshas. There is the anger and destruction of intellect when there is obstruction or opposition to desire, and there is no fulfillment and there is no integrity in that person. And then there is the experience of the greater silence and greater joy and bliss in the experience of the self. So the experience of the self gives rise to the established intellect. And finally, how does the grace of self and Bhagavan work? And what is this process of natural detachment and dispassion? and natural renunciation. So these are the things, I will try to just, thread them together. So the whole purpose of the Bhagavad Gita is to bring enlightenment and to have the experience of the self. And this is what Bhagavan has repeatedly said, in this Yoga Shastra by the Yogacharya, is to bring all the aspects of the multiplicity and the duality into the unity and bring the enlightenment. And Maharishi Ji has given the techniques from the Bhagavad Gita of the art of transcendence, of how one can be enlightened. So here the experience is very important. Otherwise, you will just have dealing with Bhagavad Gita only on the intellectual aspect. And so from the time one is born, naturally one is looking for to fulfill the desires through the gain more and more happiness through the senses. From the time the child is born, the child is trying to gain more and more happiness in the mind through the senses and the sensory objects. And this continues throughout the life and continues throughout the life. And this, so the mind needs the senses and the sensory objects to gain more happiness. And by repeated exposure to these, there will be more and more desire coming in. And when these desires are coming in, then naturally there is something called an attachment develops to the desire. You want to have it more. And these desires can be on any levels. It can be on myriad ways, whether it is your own opinions, your ideas, your tastes, and your persons or people or so many things. And then the desire, when the desire is there, then there is also whatever you see, you start choosing. There is the aversion or the attachment. So when the desire is there, and if it is not fulfilled, and if there is some obstruction, or if there is some opposition, then naturally anger comes in. And this anger, it has already been described how it can be very destructive. And where is this destruction finally going to be is in the intellect or the buddhi. Because buddhi is that finest and refined aspect of discrimination, which discriminates between good and bad, dharma and adharma, and which is conducive for enlightenment and not conducive. And so if this buddhi is destroyed, then the whole of the evolution becomes thwarted. Now, in this, here also in Bhagwat Gita, Maharishi Ji also describes the level of the silence when one is experiencing the TM. And he clearly says, that the more the silence is, then, more of this reflection of this Atma is there in the nervous system. And then one experiences the transcendent. And as one is experiencing the transcendent, or when one is transcending, there is also more and more happiness. And one experiences there is the bliss is on the relative level as well as the absolute level. And it is clearly explained that the bliss of the relative also is not lasting. It comes and goes. Whereas the bliss of the absolute Atma remains unshakable. And especially with the repeated experience of this bliss, then naturally the senses will become, the mind finds bliss more attractive, and it is not seeking out in the senses. So I will just take a moment and say, the attachment the attachment, when there is an attachment, like even, there is an attachment to a toy for a child, when there is something higher and more attractive comes in, the attachment to this thing goes away, and then the attachment to the other thing comes. In the same way, for the mind also, when it is experiencing more bliss and more fulfillment and more contentment, then naturally it is not drawn to the senses and the sensory objects as much. And when it is finally established, that means the self is separated from the non-self, or experience is separate from the non-self as in the cosmic consciousness, then this attachment to the self becomes much more to the mind. So here, the natural detachment and the natural renunciation comes to the person. Now, this attachment shifts to something greater or higher, leading to the freedom. Now, there is always, Maharishi also talks about later about this attachment to God also. People ask, is the attachment good to Guru? Is the attachment good to God? It comes naturally because the attachment has to shift from something lower to the higher. From the non-self, it went to the self. And from the self, it goes to the Gurudev or Guru. And when that comes, then all the other objects or the sensory pleasures become obsolete. So you naturally gain the attachment, but this attachment also will go. Now let us look at the grace. What is this grace? Bhagavan is talking about the grace. The first grace is that you gain the transcendence. The first grace is that you are able to gain the transcendence. And the second grace is that you are able to gain the experience of the self and have the self-realization. And the third grace is that, you are gaining also the God consciousness. So everywhere there is the grace. More and more grace is coming in. And this grace is to get rid of these attachments and to get rid of these ragadveshas and to have more contentment and fulfillment and to lead one to enlightenment and to have the lasting bliss of the Atma. Because the bliss of the relative is not constant. Only when the bliss of the Atma in the established intellect is, the bliss becomes more permanent. That means it's unshakable. One is experiencing pain, but also the bliss is there. So I think I have covered the loop that, how one seeks the happiness through the senses, how one gets attached to these, desires, how one can, if not fulfilled, then the anger comes in, and how the destruction of the intellect goes, and how the grace comes in, and what happens with, the transcendence, and how the established intellect, brings the integrity and the steadiness of everything, so that you never forget that you are the self and everything remains very stable and happy. Okay, Jai Gurudev. Now I will ask, anybody can give questions.
Yeah.
Jai Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev. Can I say a few words in Hindi?
Yeah, please do.
Okay. So, and then we'll take question.
Yeah.
अभी माताजी ने जो बताया मैं हिंदी में बोलती, यहाँ उस व्यक्ति की स्थिति का वर्णन है जो ध्यान नहीं करता है और इसलिए आंतरिक आनंद की और दिव्यता की ओर नहीं जा पा रहा है। पहले 2 श्लोकों में ये कहा गया था कि जब कामना होती है और कामना का पूर्ति नहीं होती है तो क्रोध आता है, क्रोध से अपना बुद्धि का नष्ट हो जाता है। तो इसके बारे में पहले 2 श्लोकों में बताया गया था। विचार एक महान शक्ति है। यह इच्छा में विकसित होती है और यह क्रिया की ओर ले जाती है। और जब इच्छाएं पूरी नहीं होती है तो व्यक्ति क्रोधित होता है। क्रोध मन को उत्तेजित करता है और व्यक्ति अपना संतुलन खो देता है, बुद्धि और विवेक की शक्ति खो देता है। बुद्धि काम करना बंद कर देती है और इससे मनुष्य का नाश हो जाता है। तो इसका उपाय क्या है? भावाती ध्यान से क्रोध, इच्छा, इंद्रियों का सभी दिशाओं में दौड़ना कम होता जाता है और अति सुलभ मार्ग में मन शांत होता है। ये पहले 2 श्लोकों का अर्थ है। फिर ये आखिर श्लोक में माताजी ने बताया था, और ये श्लोक में ये कहा गया है कि स्थित प्रज्ञा पुरुष में पूर्णता है, पूर्णत्व है, जो भगवान का एक गुण है। और यहाँ अनुग्रह का अर्थ प्रसन्नता और पूर्णता है। यहाँ ग्रेस जो बोलते हैं अंग्रेजी में, वो हिंदी में और संस्कृत में बोलते हैं, इसको प्रसाद कहते हैं। आत्मा की स्थिति से शुद्ध चेतना अनुग्रह का परिणाम होता है। सो भावाती ध्यान करने से अपना चेतना शुद्ध हो जाता है और वहां आपको अपन लोगों को प्रसाद मिलता है, अनुग्रह, भगवान का अनुग्रह मिलता है। यह आत्मा अनुशासित लाभ का प्रतिफल है। वह स्वयं में स्थित है, एस्टैब्लिश इन द सेल्फ, एस्टैब्लिश इन आत्मा, स्वयं में स्थित है। इसलिए वह इंद्रिय विषयों के अनुभव में खो नहीं जाता। जैसे माताजी ने कहा था कि अपना अटैचमेंट भगवान से होता है, गुरु से होता है। इसका मतलब ये नहीं होता है कि अपने सगे संबंधी को छोड़ देते हैं और उनके ऊपर प्यार नहीं करते हैं, वैसा नहीं है। वो लोगों के ऊपर जितना प्यार दिखाना है उतना आप प्यार दिखाते ही रहेंगे, फिर भी आपका मेन फोकस इज ऑन गुरु एंड गॉड। ओके, तो अभी किसी को प्रश्न पूछना है तो पूछना। एनी क्वेश्चंस इन हिंदी और इंग्लिश, प्लीज गो अहेड।
जय गुरुदेव हिमा जी।
हाँ,
बहुत सुंदर है वर्णन जो किया है गुरु माँ ने।
हाँ,
ये लेकिन ये तो है कि गुरु के ऊपर जब फोकस जाता है तो बाकी सब चीजों से हटाने के लिए दूसरा गुरु के ऊपर फोकस जाता है। तो फिर गुरु के ऊपर फोकस से जब गॉड कॉन्शियसनेस से यूनिटी कॉन्शियसनेस में जाते हैं तो कैसे एक्सपीरियंस होता है और तो कैसे वो शिफ्ट होता है फोकस, वो बात।
हाँ।
Can I say?
Mataji, please go ahead.
Yeah, because I will say it in English, Nana. Because
Yeah. Go.
You know, I make more mistakes. I speak Hindi all the time because I have people around me who are in Hindi, Pandits and all. But still, I'm not as fluent as Hemaji is. So, what happens is, you know, especially this attachment to the Guru or the God is what shifts the cosmic consciousness into the God consciousness. Because, you know, in the cosmic consciousness, the attachment is to the self. And when you have this good experience of the pure, clear experience of the self and you're attached, that attachment to the self, because you understand that you are now not limited, not bounded, and, you know, and there is this infinite possibilities are there. And so, whereas the non-self, which is the totality of you, is limited and it is, you know, changing. And so naturally the mind shifts, gets attached to the self and says, I want the experience of the self more and more. I want more and more of the samadhis. I want to have more and more bliss. I want to be more and more of the Atma. And this desire to have the more and more of the Atma, being attached to the Atma, is what brings the cosmic consciousness to begin with. Okay? And then when this cosmic consciousness comes, then the self is still the self, and then the non-self, is non-self. And so this non-self, which is you, is again saying, now, I feel I am not still one with the self. And this is where, Maharishi ji always clearly says, the only thing you have to continue doing is more and more transcendence and more of this experience of the self. Then there is, because of this, there's more attachment. And if you are, if you are devoted, some people are not as devoted. If you are devoted, then attachment to that God comes. So this attachment to the God and then the Guru is what will bring the non-self, change the non-self into divinity. It will start shifting the non-self into bringing the divine values and the qualities in that union. And so in this, you might think, this attachment is still an attachment, but this is a good attachment which takes away all other attachments, which leaves you free of all the other attachments, which leaves you free of that bondage to all the other things which are the non-self. And so by continuing this, this devotion and then continuing with this transcendence, then what happens is this little duality that is existing there, the God and the Bhakta, the Bhagavan and the Bhakta becomes closed. And this leads to the unity consciousness. So when this becomes closed, this attachment is finished.
Yeah, I want to very nicely explain, Mataji. Puja, what happens is, like Mataji just now said, when you reach the unity, then you unite with God. For you to have attachment, there has to be two things, right? You and something else that you're attached to. There are two things. But in unity, what happens? You go beyond duality and you are one now. So when you are the only one, there is no question of any attachment. So there is unity there. So the attachment is gone. Puja, clear hai?
जय गुरुदेव हिमा जी. हाँ, काफी कुछ क्लियर है. जैसे एक एक्सपीरियंस होता है कि जब हम गॉड कॉन्शियसनेस में होते हैं तो भगवान जो है वो ही सब कुछ होता है, वो ही सबसे प्यारा लगता है और ऐसा लगता है कि जस्ट वो हमारे साथ ही जी रहे हैं. जैसे इट्स लाइक कि हमारे साथ 24 घंटे कोई साथ में हमारे मन की बात जो है वो सुन रहा है, इस तरीके से. लेकिन यूनिटी में क्या होता है कि ये भाव इतना सुंदर है कि इससे मन निकलता ही नहीं है. लेकिन एज ऑफ माय एक्सपीरियंस आई बिलीव कि जैसे जब मैं छोटे बच्चों के साथ होती हूँ तो मुझे वो एक्सपीरियंस इससे भी बहुत बेटर लगता है, बिकॉज आई एम लाफिंग विद देयर लाफ, आई एम क्राइंग विद देयर क्राई, आई फील एवरी इमोशन ऑफ देम इन लाइक every second I am living their life. So it's like, although sometimes it happens with me that I feel grief and anger and somebody's, if an elder in somebody in a emotion, I can sense that and I can feel that what he's feeling and gone through, and I can help them in a way they can come out. But हाँ, इन्फेंट्स के साथ, बच्चों के साथ ज्यादा होता है कि मैं बहुत जल्दी वो यूनिटी वाला एक्सपीरियंस जो हर खुशी में खुश हो जाते हैं वैसा फील करते हूँ. बड़ों के साथ थोड़ा कम होता है, लेकिन हाँ, तो ये मुझे लगता है कि दैट इज लाइक मी इन एवरीवन वाली फीलिंग. हर बच्चे में मुझे अपना अक्स जैसे लगता है. दैट इज वेरी ब्यूटीफुल.
Yes, that is because you see, because in this in God consciousness, the self has become divine. So the love, we always say, when we talk about Mother Divine, we say, Mother has infinite love, infinite compassion, infinite grace, infinite forgiveness, and all that qualities, right? So those qualities are the ones which are flowing out through you in this God consciousness. So what is non-self, which is the manavata, the manava qualities, the human qualities, are elevated to the divine qualities. And so everything becomes expanded. The love, the compassion, the forgiveness, the kindness, all those qualities become, more divine because of that consciousness. And of course, your attachment is also like that to Bhagavan. You feel that 1 minute, you cannot be without the thought of Bhagavan. And but that shifts. Everything has that shifting value until you get to the Advaita, total Advaita.
But Mataji, if I may ask this question, what Pooja is saying,
Yeah.
then if you have reached that level,
Yeah.
then the things don't vary. Like he says, when I'm with children, it is like this, but when I'm in elders, it is not like this. But once you are reached that state, you are same with everything. There is no differentiation. There is nothing. You are in unity. Unity with yourself, with oneness. So when you're in the unity in oneness, then that there is no differentiation between children and elders and me and you.
But that
No.
will happen when you're still on the path, Anitaji.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we
I
are
will
not
explain
fully
that.
enlightened.
I will explain that a little bit deeper, So what happens is, when you're in the unity, it does not mean that you lose the vision of what is happening in the relative. Just like, if you're in the ocean, you still see the waves, you still see the waves playing on. But you know very clearly that you are that ocean, that infinite oneness of the ocean. And these waves are playing the way they want it. They want, And so this feeling of this, that you are the self and everything is only within you, because the wave is not separate from the ocean. So you enjoy it, you enjoy it. In Lalita Sahasranamam, there is a word which says Bala Leela Vinodini. Bala Leela Vinodini. She being the self, she is enjoying the whole thing, the Leela. And Bhagavan Krishna is the same thing. He being the self, he is enjoying the whole Leela. So you become the Leela Dhari now. In the unity consciousness, you become the Leela Dhari. So you understand that you are the self. You know you're the self. It's not understanding because it's on the existential level. And you see this all going and you just, either you enjoy it or you remain silent if something is not so pleasant. Because both things can be happening now. There will be something pleasant, there will be something not pleasant. But you go beyond this raga dveshas. And you understand it's not separate from you. Now you are the ocean.
Right.
Right. And another point is, Anitaji, unity becomes primary and the boundaries become secondary. They're not overshadowing the unity. So that's why in the relative, we continue to have the relationship. We are not completely separate from all the relationship. So those relationships will be there in the relative, but they will not overshadow the unity and the boundaries become secondary. So this is very important point to remember. When you reach unity, unity is primary. You are looking at the flower, but you know that there is underlying colorless sap. But on the surface, you are seeing pink and green and, all those things. So that is the state of consciousness in unity. Okay.
Right.
Nice
Thank
discussion.
you.
Yeah. Okay. So let's move on now. We will do 5-minute meditation and then a little bit of chanting, and then we will end. Any other questions?
Okay. Jai Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev. Mataji, do you want to sign off? If you want to go, we will continue with. Okay. Thank you very much for being here with us and for the comments. We'll see you next week.
Imaji, scientific research.
Scientific research, Hemaji, you want me to do?
Let us skip, Anitaji, let us skip because I would like to include meditation and chanting.
Yeah. Okay. No problem. Jai Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev. Let us sit comfortably and do 5-minute meditation. Let's close eyes. Jai Gurudev. Take a minute or so and slowly open the eyes. Slowly open the eyes. सचिन रिकॉर्डिंग पास्ट अभी गीता पारायण है मनीष जी
जी दीदी
गीता पारायण करना द्वितीय
दीदी।
अध्याय 40
जी।
से लेकर आखिर तक
जी दीदी
सचिन आर यू देयर सचिन साइंड आउट लुक्स लाइक जाने दो आप आरंभ कीजिए
जी जी दीदी जी दीदी ओ श्री परमात्मने नमः शशंख चक्रम कुंडलम सपेत वस्त्रम शिरसेरुहेक्षणम सहस्रवक्षस्थलकौश्रिवश्रियं नमामि विष्णुं शिरसा चतुर्भुजम् ॐ श्री परमात्मने नमः द्वितीयोऽध्यायः ॐ नेहाभिक्रमनाशोऽस्ति प्रत्यवायो न विद्यते स्वल्पमप्यस्य धर्मस्य त्रायते महतो भयात् दिव्यास्यात्मिका बुद्धिर् एकेह कुरुनन्दन बहुशाखा ह्यनन्ताश्च बुद्धयो व्यवसायिना यामिमां पुष्पितां वाचं प्रवदन्त्यपि पश्चितः वेदवादरतः पार्थ नान्यदस्तीति वासिनामात्मानः स्वर्गपदा जन्मकर्मफलप्रदां क्रिया विशेषबहुलां भोगैश्वर्यगतिं प्रति भोगैश्वर्यप्रसक्तानां तया परहत चेतसां वैशाभिमिका बुद्धि समाधौ न विधीयते त्रैगुण्यविषया वेदा यस्त्रैगुण्यो भवार्जुन निर्द्वन्द्वो नित्यसत्त्वस्थो नरयोगक्षेम आत्मवान् यावानर्थ उदपाने सर्वतः सम्प्लुतोदके तावान् सर्वेषु वेदेषु ब्राह्मणस्य भिजायते कर्मण्येवाधिकारस्ते मा फलेषु कदाचन मा कर्मफलहेतुर्भूर्मा ते सङ्गोऽस्तु कर्मणि सङ्गं त्यक्त्वा धनञ्जय सिद्धियो समो भूत्वा समत्वं योग उच्यते दोरेण ह्यवरं कर्म बुद्धियोगात् धनञ्जयः बुद्धौ शरणमन्विच्छ कृपणः फलहेतवः दियकुतो हातिः योगः कर्मसु कौशलम् कर्मजं बुद्धियुक्ता हि फलं त्यक्त्वा मनीषिणः जन्मबन्धविनिर्युक्ताः पदम गच्छन्त्यनामयम् यदा ते मोहि कलिलं बुद्धिर्व्यतितरिष्यति तदा गन्तासि निर्वेदं श्रोतव्यस्य श्रुतस्य च श्रुतिप्रतिपन्ना ते यदा स्थास्यति निश्चला समाधावचला स्थितप्रज्ञस्य का भासा समाधिस्थस्य केशव स्थितधि किं प्रभासेत किमासीत व्रजेत किम् श्रीभगवानुवाच प्रजहाति यदा कामान् सर्वान् पार्थमनोगतान् आत्मन्येवात्मनः तुष्ट स्थितप्रज्ञस्तदोच्यते दुःखेषु अनुद्विग्नमनः सुखेषु विगतस्पृहः वीतरागभयक्रोधः स्थितधीर्मुनिरुच्यते यः सर्वत्र न विस्नेहः तत् प्राप्य शुभाशुभम् नाभिनन्दति नाद्वेष्टि तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता यदा संहरते चायं कूर्मोऽङ्गनीव सर्वशः इन्द्रियाणेन्द्रियार्थेभ्यस्तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता विषया विनिवर्तन्ते निराहारस्य देहिनः रसवर्जसरसोऽप्यस्य परं दृष्ट्वा निवर्तते यततो ह्यपि कौन्तेय पुरुषस्य विपश्चितः इन्द्रियाणि प्रमाथीनि हरन्ति प्रसभं मनः तानि सर्वाणि संयम्य युक्त आसीत् मत्परः वशे हि यस्येन्द्रियाणि तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता ध्यायतो विषयान् पुंसः सङ्गस्तेषुपजायते सङ्गात् सञ्जायते कामः कामात् क्रोधोऽभिजायते क्रोधात् भवति सम्मोहः सम्मोहात् स्मृतिविभ्रमः स्मृतिभ्रंशात् बुद्धिनाशो बुद्धिनाशात् प्रणश्यति रागद्वेषवियुक्तैस्तु विषयानिन्द्रियैश्चरन् आत्मवश्यैर्विधेयात्मा प्रसादमधिगच्छति प्रसादे सर्वदुःखानां हानिरस्योपजायते प्रसन्नचेतसो ह्यासु बुद्धिः पर्यवतिष्ठते नास्ति बुद्धिर्युक्तस्य न चायुक्तस्य भावना न चाभावयतः शान्तिरशान्तस्य कुतः सुखम् इन्द्रियाणां हि चरतां यन्मनोनुविधीयते तदस्य हरति प्रज्ञां वायुर्नाविविभां वशे तस्माद्यस्य महाबाहो निगृहीतानि सर्वशः इन्द्रियाणेन्द्रियार्थेभ्यस्तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता या निशा सर्वभूतानां तस्यां जागृति संयमी यस्यां जागृति भूतानि सा निशा पश्यतो मुनेः अपूर्यमाणामचलप्रतिष्ठं समुद्रमापः प्रवशन्ति यद्वत् तद्वत् कामायं प्रवशन्ति सर्वे सशान्तिमाप्नोति न कामे कामी विहाय कामन्यः सर्वान् पुमांश्चरति निष्प्रहा निर्ममो निरहङ्कार सशान्तिमधिगच्छति एषः ब्राह्मीस्थितिः पार्थ नैनां प्राप्य मुह्यते स्थित्वा स्यामन्तकालेऽपि ब्रह्मनिर्वाणं गच्छति ॐ तत्सदिति श्रीमद्भगवद्गीतासु उपनिषत्सु ब्रह्मविद्यायां योगशास्त्रे श्रीकृष्णार्जुनसंवादे सांख्ययोगो नाम तृतीयोऽध्यायः। ओम श्रीकृष्णार्पणमस्तु।
मनीषी शांति पाठ भी बोलना।
गुरुदेव दीदी।
Shanti Path.
हरि ओम अध्यो शांतिरंतरिक्षगुं शांतिः पृथिवी शांतिरापः शांतिरोषधयः शांतिः वनस्पतयः शान्तिर्विश्वे देवा शान्ति ब्रह्म शांतिः शांतिरेव शांतिः सामा शांतिरेधि जतो यतः समीहसि ततो नो अभयं कुरु सन्नः कुरु प्रजाभ्यो भयन्नः पाशव्यः। ओम शांति शांति शांति। जय गुरुदेव।
Jai Gurudev.
जय गुरुदेव।
Jai Gurudev. Thank you all for joining. We will end the meeting now. We'll meet next Friday, same time. Jai Gurudev.
जय गुरुदेव दीदी।
Mhm.
जय गुरु।